Ontology, mapping what truly exists. So, what actually counts as real? A rock, a tree, your phone. Those feel pretty straightforward. But what about less tangible things like time, love, or numbers? Do they exist in the same way? These are the kinds of deep questions ontology seeks to answer. Ontology is a specialized branch of philosophy that centers on a deceptively simple yet profound question. What exists? It lives within the broader realm of metaphysics and concerns itself with the most fundamental categories of being. Unlike science, which often explores what things are made of, ontology goes a step further. It asks what kinds of things can exist in the first place. Think about it. Is the universe made up solely of physical objects, like atoms and matter? Or should we also include non-material things, ideas, feelings, values, as part of what's truly real? Ontology explores whether reality is purely material or if the abstract deserves a seat at the table too. One of the core ideas in ontology is the distinction between particulars and universals. Particulars are specific, individual entities. Your cat, this chair. Universals, by contrast, are the shared traits or qualities, like softness or redness, that can be found across many different objects. The question that ontologists debate is, are these universals actual parts of reality, or are they just convenient names we've invented? Ontology also grapples with questions of identity and persistence. Consider this classic thought experiment. If you replace every single part of a ship one by one, is it still the same ship when none of the original parts remain? It sounds like a brain teaser, but it's actually a deep ontological puzzle, one that explores how things maintain their identity through change and over time. Surprisingly, ontology isn't just for philosophers anymore. It plays a major role in modern technology too, in fields like artificial intelligence and computer science. An ontology refers to a structured framework for organizing knowledge. It helps machines understand how different pieces of data are connected, essentially teaching them to think more like us by building a digital map of reality. At its heart, ontology is about creating a clearer understanding of what the world is made of, whether that world is made of matter, mind, or meaning. It gives us a way to sort and categorize our experiences, even when reality turns out to be more complex than it first appears. And in doing so, it quietly shapes the way we interpret everything that exists, from trees outside your window to the invisible threads of thought that run through your mind. Dualism, two sides of reality. When you stub your toe and feel that sharp jolt of pain, is it just electrical activity in your brain? Or could there be more to the story? Something beyond the physical? A mind, a soul, an unseen inner self? This is where the concept of dualism enters the picture. At its core, dualism is the philosophical idea that reality is made up of two distinct kinds of substance, the physical and the mental. On one side, there's your body, flesh, bones, neurons. On the other, there's your mind, thoughts, emotions, awareness. According to dualism, these two aren't the same. They're fundamentally different, but mysteriously connected. This view says that your thoughts, dreams, and memories aren't just the byproducts of brain chemistry. They come from something immaterial, something that isn't bound by physical laws. This something is often described as the mind or soul, a conscious entity separate from the body. To understand this better, Picture a driver and a car. The car can move, steer, and stop, but it doesn't decide where to go. That's up to the driver. In the same way, dualism sees the body as the vehicle and the mind as the one behind the wheel. The body does the moving, but the mind makes the choices. But this idea raises a deep and difficult question. If the mind isn't physical, how can it control the body? How does a non-material thought cause a physical hand to reach out? This puzzle is famously known as the mind-body problem, and it has intrigued and challenged philosophers for centuries. Even in today's world of advanced neuroscience and brain imaging, dualistic thinking still lingers in our everyday language and beliefs. We talk about souls and inner selves. We say things like someone is trapped in their own mind, as if mind and body were truly separate. Despite all the scientific progress, the central question remains unresolved. Is the mind just the brain, or is it something more? Dualism doesn't claim to solve every mystery. What it does offer is a starting point, a recognition that the physical and mental feel deeply different. And from that simple observation, it builds one of the most enduring and thought-provoking theories in all of philosophy: metaphysics, a journey into the nature of reality. Have you ever paused to ask yourself why reality is the way it is? Why anything exists at all? Why there's something instead of absolutely nothing? At first glance, these might seem like simple or even idle curiosities, but they're actually at the heart of one of the most ancient and profound fields in philosophy: metaphysics. Despite its intimidating name, metaphysics is not as obscure as it sounds. At its essence, it's the exploration of reality itself. While physics and science work to explain how the world functions, metaphysics dares to ask a deeper question. What is existence, really? What does it mean for something to be? This line of inquiry can be traced back to the ancient Greeks, particularly Aristotle. Interestingly, the term metaphysics originally meant nothing more than after-physics, simply because Aristotle's writings on these subjects followed his work on more tangible topics like motion and matter. Over time, however, the word evolved. Metaphysics came to signify philosophy's bold attempt to comprehend the ultimate structure and essence of reality. Metaphysics typically focuses on two major branches. The first is known as ontology, which is concerned with the categorization and nature of all that exists. Ontologists investigate whether abstract concepts, such as beauty, virtue, or numbers, are independently real or simply inventions of the human mind. For example, consider the color red. Does the concept of redness have a real, independent existence, or is it merely the label we assign to certain visual experiences? The second area dives into more intimate, human-centered mysteries. It wrestles with questions surrounding consciousness and the mind, the possibility of free will, and whether anything exists beyond what we can physically perceive. These are deeply personal topics that directly influence how we see ourselves and our role in the vast universe. While metaphysical questions rarely lead to clear, testable answers like those in the sciences, that doesn't lessen their value. In fact, their very difficulty is what makes them so powerful. They force us to look beyond the surface and confront the fundamental enigma of existence itself. Metaphysics invites us into a deeper awareness. It challenges us to question what we usually take for granted and to engage more thoughtfully with the world around us. You don't have to be a trained philosopher to start this journey. All it takes is the willingness to wonder, to look a little more closely, and to embrace the mystery that lies behind the everyday. Monism. the hidden unity beneath everything. When you look around, the world feels like a patchwork of separate pieces: people, animals, buildings, trees, phones. Everything appears distinct and divided. But there's an ancient idea that turns this familiar view on its head. It's called Monism, and it proposes something remarkable: that beneath all these differences, everything is, at its core, one. The word monism comes from the Greek root meaning single, or one. In philosophy, monism is the belief that all of existence, every thought, every feeling, every object, is ultimately made of just one underlying reality, one principle, one substance, one source. At first, that might sound vague or overly abstract, but the heart of the idea is actually quite straightforward. Instead of dividing reality into opposing forces, like mind versus matter, or body versus soul, monism suggests something simpler. There are not two things, only one thing expressing itself in many forms. There are different interpretations of this idea. One version is known as material monism. It says that everything, thoughts, dreams, emotions, is just a product of physical matter. Another version, idealist monism, flips that around. It claims that everything is mental, that all of reality is like one vast, shared consciousness. Then there's neutral monism, which offers a third path. Reality isn't mental or physical, but something more fundamental, something neutral that gives rise to both mind and matter. To get a sense of monism, picture a wave rising on the surface of the ocean. You can point to that wave and describe it. It has shape, size, motion, but ultimately, it's not separate from the sea. It's just the ocean taking a temporary form. That's how monism views all things: you, me, trees, stars, as expressions of the same vast, undivided reality. This isn't just an abstract theory. The idea of monism has profoundly influenced cultures and philosophies for centuries. In the East, teachings like Advaita Vedanta embrace this vision of non-duality, where the self and the universe are one. In the West, monistic ideas echo in modern discussions about quantum physics and the fabric of space and time. Monism gently invites us to reconsider how we perceive the world. It doesn't ask us to ignore the differences we see. It encourages us to look beyond them, to sense the quiet unity hiding beneath the noise, to see not just many things, but one thing endlessly unfolding. So the next time the world feels fractured or distant, remember this ancient thought: perhaps it's not made of many things at all. Perhaps it's just one, appearing as many. Idealism. When reality begins in the mind, close your eyes. The world seems to vanish. Trees, streets, people, sky, all gone. But what if, in a very real way, it actually does? That's the strange yet captivating possibility posed by idealism, a profound philosophical perspective. Idealism proposes that reality is fundamentally mental, that everything we perceive as real, from physical objects to space, and even time itself, is not independent of the mind. Instead, it's all shaped by, or even entirely made of, ideas and conscious experience. According to idealist thinkers, the external world doesn't exist separately from our perception of it. Reality, they say, is something that exists because it is observed, felt, or thought about. Without a perceiver, there is no world. One of the most notable voices in idealist philosophy was George Berkeley, an 18th century thinker who made a radical claim. Matter, as we know it, doesn't exist on its own. Take a tree, for example. We usually think of it as a solid object standing in the world whether we see it or not. But Berkeley argued that the tree only exists because it is being perceived by you, by others, or perhaps by a greater universal mind. To him, to be is to be perceived. At first glance, this feels counter to everything we assume about reality. We grow up believing that the world is out there, objective and unchanging. But idealism invites us to question that belief. Consider a dream. When you're inside it, everything feels real. The people, the conversations, the scenery, they all have form and meaning. Yet none of it exists beyond your own mind. Idealists suggest that what we call real life might function in much the same way, just more stable and collectively experienced. There are many branches of idealism. Some propose that all of reality is made of consciousness itself, one vast, undivided awareness taking many forms. Others claim that the structure of reality is determined by the frameworks of thought, that our minds come preloaded with ways of interpreting the world, like lenses that shape what we experience. Despite their differences, all idealist philosophies share one unshakable idea, that the mind is not just a part of reality, it is the foundation of reality. Idealism doesn't simply ask what's real, it flips the entire question on its head. Instead of imagining that thoughts float above a material world, it suggests that thoughts are the material world. Materialism, a world made of matter, the phone you're holding, the ideas swirling in your mind, even the emotions that stir your heart. What if all of these, at their core, are made of the same basic stuff? That's the central idea behind materialism, a powerful and enduring perspective in philosophy. Materialism suggests that everything that exists is fundamentally physical, not just the obvious things, rocks, trees, stars, but also the things we often think of as immaterial. Your thoughts, your dreams, your memories. According to this view, none of these exist apart from the body. They are rooted in the same physical substance that makes up everything else. Matter. This concept isn't new. It traces all the way back to ancient thinkers like Democritus, who imagined that everything in the universe was built from indivisible particles, what we now call atoms. But it was with the rise of modern science that materialism really began to shape how we understand reality. As fields like physics, biology, and chemistry revealed the inner workings of the world, materialism provided a compelling lens. If something can be measured, observed, or explained through physical forces, then it is real. From this perspective, the mind isn't something separate or supernatural. It doesn't float above the body. It is the body, or more specifically, the brain. Just as a computer runs software using circuits and electricity, your mind is seen as the result of neurons firing, chemicals interacting, and biological systems processing information. Thought, emotion, memory. They all arise from the physical. Still, materialism faces one major puzzle: consciousness. How does matter, silent, inert, physical stuff, give rise to awareness, to the vivid experience of being alive? Critics argue this is the great challenge materialism hasn't yet solved. Supporters believe it's only a matter of time and scientific progress. Regardless of the debate, there's no denying how deeply materialism has influenced the modern world. It forms the backbone of neuroscience, psychology, and artificial intelligence. If the mind is physical, then it can be studied, understood, and maybe even recreated. At its heart, materialism is a bold and elegant idea. The universe follows physical laws, and so do we. Even the most personal parts of ourselves, our passions, fears, and dreams, are bound to the same principles that shape the stars. Arche, the first origin of everything, every wave in the ocean, every star in the sky, even the thoughts drifting through your mind, must have come from somewhere. But what if we went even deeper? What if we asked the most fundamental question of all? What was the very first thing? The true beginning of everything? That's exactly what the early Greek philosophers set out to explore when they introduced the concept of arche. This term refers to the original substance or principle from which all things emerge. If the universe were a massive structure, arche would be the raw material, the bricks, the beams, the foundation out of which it was built. Different thinkers from ancient times had their own interpretations of what this first element might be. Take Thales, for instance, one of the earliest known philosophers. He proposed that everything comes from water, not because the world is soaking wet, but because water seemed to be everywhere, in rain, rivers, oceans, and even in living beings. To him, water was the universal thread that connected all things. Others challenged this view. Anaximenes believed air was the true source. Heraclitus looked to fire, seeing it as a symbol of constant change. And Anaximander offered something even more abstract. He argued that the origin wasn't any recognizable substance at all, but rather an infinite, indefinite force he called the apeiron, a kind of boundless and formless essence that gave rise to everything. These ideas weren't just wild speculation. They were serious, logical attempts to make sense of the universe, formed through careful thought and observation, long before modern science was ever imagined. In fact, these ancient reflections planted the earliest seeds for what would eventually grow into the fields of physics and cosmology. The idea of arche was more than just a theory. It was a bold step toward understanding the universe not through myths or divine tales, but through rational thought and inquiry. It was a declaration. Let's search for the truth about reality, not in stories, but in reason. And even today, that search continues. Scientists and philosophers alike are still wrestling with versions of the same timeless question: what is everything made of? Where did it all begin? Though the idea of arche comes from a distant past, its spirit lives on. It's a symbol of humanity's eternal desire to trace everything back to its origin, to uncover the hidden roots of existence. In asking where it all began, we're not just looking for answers, we're reconnecting with that ancient, universal impulse to understand everything. Atomism, the universe in tiny pieces, the phone in your hand, the breath you just took, the glow of light in your room. What if everything around you, including your own body, is made of tiny pieces so small you can't see them? That simple yet profound idea lies at the core of atomism, one of the oldest philosophical attempts to understand the fabric of reality. Atomism holds that everything in existence is composed of minuscule, indivisible particles called atoms. Now, these aren't the atoms of modern science. No protons or electrons here, but a much earlier concept, born over 2 millennia ago in ancient Greece. Philosophers like Leucippus and Democritus imagined a universe not as a continuous flow, but as a vast expanse of tiny, eternal particles moving through empty space. In their view, atoms are solid, unbreakable, and everlasting. They come in different shapes and sizes, and the variety of things we see, plants, animals, stones, even flames and water, emerge from different combinations and arrangements of these atoms. Change, then, isn't magic or mystery. It's just atoms shifting places and forming new patterns. This was a radical idea in its time. It rejected popular beliefs built on myth, divine will, or unseen spirits. Atomists proposed something bold for their era, that the universe is governed by natural principles, not gods or mystical forces. They were among the first to embrace a mechanical, lawful cosmos, a vision that centuries later would help shape the scientific revolutions of the Enlightenment. But atomism isn't just about tiny pieces of matter. It's about a transformation in how humans saw the world. It was a leap from storytelling to logic, from superstition to reasoned observation. It was an early foundation for what we now call the scientific method. Of course, today's physics has gone far beyond ancient atomism. We now know that what the Greeks called atoms are themselves made up of even smaller components, quarks, leptons, and energy fields. Yet the core idea remains deeply relevant, that complex things can often be explained by breaking them down into simpler building blocks. In this way, atomism marks one of philosophy's earliest and most important steps toward science. It reminds us that even the vast, complicated world around us might just be the result of countless tiny pieces dancing in a grand and silent harmony. Realism, the world beyond our minds. Imagine a tree falling in a forest with no one around to hear it. Did it really fall? According to realism in philosophy, the answer is yes, and the tree, along with the entire forest, exists regardless of whether anyone sees or hears it. Realism is the belief that the world exists independently of us. Our thoughts, perceptions, or beliefs don't define what's real. Mountains still stand, stars still burn, and grains of sand still lie undisturbed whether or not anyone is there to observe them. Reality in this view is not dependent on human awareness. It simply is. At first, this may seem like common sense, but not all philosophical perspectives agree. Some suggest that reality is shaped, or even created, by consciousness, perception, or mental experience. Realism challenges this by insisting that facts about the world are objective. They don't bend or vanish based on who's looking at them or how they feel about them. There are different forms of realism, depending on the domain being explored. In metaphysics, realism maintains that physical things, trees, rivers, stars, exist whether or not we're aware of them. In the realm of science, realism says that theories aim to describe real, existing phenomena, like black holes or quantum particles, even if we can't directly observe them. Realism also shows up in ethics. Moral realists argue that some things are genuinely right or wrong, no matter what individuals or cultures believe. Morality, in this sense, isn't just a matter of opinion. It's rooted in something deeper and more stable. One especially tricky area for realists is abstract concepts. Take something like the number 7. You can't see it, hold it, or bump into it on the street. Yet it's used constantly in mathematics, science, and everyday life. So, does it really exist? Many realists would say yes, just not in a physical way. It's part of the structure of reality, even if it isn't made of atoms. What makes realism such a compelling idea is its grounded confidence in the existence of a stable, discoverable world. It holds that reality has structure, rules, and facts, regardless of how we feel or whether we understand it yet. That belief forms the backbone of science, logic, and much of how we make sense of the universe. Realism reminds us that we are not the center of existence. The world is bigger than our opinions of it, and that might be a comforting thought. No matter what we believe, the universe carries on. Epistemology, understanding how we know what we know. Think about something you believe to be true. Did you discover it yourself? Or maybe you heard it somewhere, read it, or were told it, and then decided it probably makes sense. But how can you be sure it's actually true? This is exactly what epistemology investigates. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that deals with knowledge, what it really is, how we acquire it, and how we can be confident that we truly possess it. Let's start with the basics. To say you know something, usually three conditions need to be met. First, the belief has to be true. Second, you have to genuinely believe it. And third, there must be a solid reason or justification for that belief. It's this last part, justification, that separates real knowledge from a lucky guess or coincidence. Picture this. Someone randomly picks numbers in a lottery and wins. They guessed correctly, but did they actually know the winning numbers? Probably not. Now imagine a meteorologist who studies weather patterns and predicts rain tomorrow. When the rain does fall, that prediction is closer to knowledge because it's a belief supported by evidence, not just a shot in the dark. Epistemology also asks, where does knowledge come from? Some philosophers argue that we're born with certain truths already inside us, innate ideas hardwired into our minds. Others believe all knowledge is built from experience, gathered through our senses as we interact with the world. It also explores tricky issues like memory, perception, and language, since so much of what we know comes from other people. One major challenge epistemology wrestles with is skepticism. How can we trust what our senses tell us when illusions, false memories, and mistakes happen? And how do we know that the world outside our mind matches our experience of it at all? While epistemology rarely hands us simple answers, it provides a crucial foundation for sorting out which beliefs are reliable and which are not. In a world flooded with information, misinformation, and doubt, having this kind of clear guidance becomes more valuable than ever. Pluralism, embracing the many layers of reality. Sometimes the world just doesn't fit into a single box. And that's exactly where pluralism begins. In philosophy, pluralism is the idea that reality is too complex to be explained by just one kind of thing or a single, all-encompassing principle. Unlike monism, which insists everything comes from one fundamental source, whether it be matter, consciousness, or some neutral essence, pluralism says that's simply not enough. Reality, it argues, is built from multiple layers, each distinct, each essential, and none of them reducible to just one substance or truth. This perspective isn't new. It stretches back to ancient thinkers like Empedocles, who proposed that the universe wasn't born from just one element, but four foundational substances: earth, air, fire, and water. Rather than narrowing things down, pluralism invites us to see the broader picture, where variety is not a flaw, but a feature of existence. In modern philosophy, the idea has matured, but the core remains the same. reducing everything to one explanation, whether atoms, neurons, or pure thought, overlooks the richness of reality. Think of a painting. You could describe it by naming the pigments on the canvas, but that wouldn't capture its emotional pull, its cultural meaning, or the intention behind it. Each layer, psychological, artistic, historical, adds to the full story. Pluralism shows up in many fields, from ethics and politics to science and art, as a philosophy of coexistence and complexity. It suggests that multiple viewpoints can be valid at the same time, not because everything is relative or subjective, but because the world itself is deep and intricate enough to support more than one kind of truth. This view encourages flexibility in how we understand life. In ethics, it might mean recognizing different moral systems that work in different cultures. In science, it could mean appreciating both biology and chemistry without trying to reduce one to the other. Philosophical pluralism gently reminds us that we don't always need to chase a single grand answer. Sometimes, multiple explanations, each valid in its own way, come together to reveal a fuller, more honest picture of the world. It's not about contradiction. It's about complementing perspectives. Next time you look at something complex, like a society, a person, or even your own thoughts, remember, more than one truth might be operating at the same time. Pluralism invites you to explore them all. Rationalism, knowing through reason alone. Some things seem to be known simply by thinking about them. This idea forms the foundation of rationalism, the philosophical belief that reason itself is the main source of knowledge. Rationalism claims that certain truths can be understood without relying on experience, purely through logic, thought, and deduction. In other words, not all knowledge depends on our senses. This viewpoint stands in opposition to empiricism, which holds that knowledge comes primarily from observation and experience. Rationalists argue that although experience is helpful, it doesn't form the basis for all knowledge. Instead, there are some truths we can grasp using reason alone. Rationalist philosophers propose that the mind is born with some fundamental ideas or mental structures already in place. These are often called innate ideas. Examples include concepts like quantity, identity, or cause and effect. These aren't learned from the outside world. They are simply part of how the mind works from birth. One of the most well-known rationalists, René Descartes, used pure reasoning to try to find absolute certainty. He began by doubting everything, even his senses, and then built up knowledge step by step through logical deduction. His goal was to show that reason could provide a firm foundation for knowledge, especially when sensory experience might deceive us. Rationalism has deeply influenced science, mathematics, and philosophy. It champions the idea that the mind isn't merely a passive receiver of information, but an active tool that discovers truth. By trusting reason, rationalism helps explain how we comprehend things that go beyond direct experience, things that are abstract, universal, and essential for understanding the world. Solipsism. Have you ever wondered, what if everything around you doesn't really exist? What if it's all just in your head? That's the strange and somewhat unsettling concept behind solipsism. Solipsism is a philosophical idea suggesting that the only thing you can be truly certain of is the existence of your own mind. Everything else, other people, the external world, even your own physical body, could simply be parts of your own conscious experience. Not because you're intentionally imagining them, but because there's no way to prove they exist outside your perception. It begins with a basic truth. Every experience you've ever had is filtered through your own mind. You don't have access to other people's inner lives. You can see someone smile, but you can't feel their happiness. You can hear a sound, but it's interpreted by your senses, your brain. From this perspective, the entire world might just be a mental projection, something your mind continuously constructs. Now, solipsism doesn't claim that everyone else is fake or that reality definitely isn't real. Instead, it challenges the idea that we can ever be completely sure. Any evidence you gather, whether through sight, sound, or reason, still comes from within your own mental experience. It's like trying to look beyond your own shadow. You're always inside it. But solipsism isn't just a mental puzzle. It ties into big questions in epistemology, the study of knowledge, and the science of consciousness. Philosophers use solipsism as a tool to examine the boundaries of what we can know and how we define real. It forces philosophy to question its foundations, to tread carefully around assumptions. Even though almost no one truly believes in solipsism as a way of life, the idea itself plays an important role. It serves as a reminder: what we believe to be true might not be as solid as we think. The line between certainty and belief is thinner than it seems. Skepticism, questioning what we think we know. Every day, you watch the sunrise, feel your feet on the floor, and listen to the news reporting events around the world. It all feels solid and certain, but skepticism throws a straightforward challenge. How do you truly know that any of it is real? In philosophy, skepticism is the position that encourages us to doubt or hold off judgment about what we believe we know. It doesn't outright claim that nothing is true. Instead, it raises serious doubts about whether we can ever be completely certain about anything, especially when our knowledge relies heavily on perception, memory, or what others tell us. One of the earliest skeptics, Pyrrho of Elis, argued that since our senses can mislead us, the safest approach is to suspend belief. If things appear differently from various perspectives or under changing conditions, how can we confidently trust any single experience? Consider a simple example. You place a straight stick into a glass of water, and it seems bent or broken at the surface. Your eyes tell you one thing, but your reasoning says something else. Skeptics use such examples to highlight that perception can be deceptive. And if our senses aren't always trustworthy, then anything built upon them, whether science, history, or everyday experience, becomes less certain. Modern skepticism takes this questioning even further. Some skeptics ask, how do we know we aren't dreaming right now, or living inside a computer simulation? Others point out that even our logic could be flawed, because it relies on assumptions that can only be supported through reasoning itself, creating a kind of circular problem. Yet skepticism isn't about surrendering the search for knowledge. Rather, it's about demanding rigorous proof before accepting something as known. It encourages philosophy to be more cautious, more precise, and more transparent about the boundaries of what we can truly claim. In this way, skepticism is not an enemy of truth. Instead, it acts as a powerful tool to test and refine our understanding. Pragmatism, truth in action. Sometimes, in real life, maybe the only truth that matters is what actually works. That's the fundamental idea behind pragmatism. This philosophical approach centers on the practical effects of beliefs. Instead of worrying about whether something is absolutely or abstractly true, pragmatists ask a different question. Does it work? If a belief helps you solve problems, make accurate predictions, or simply navigate life better, then it has value, and that usefulness might be enough to qualify it as knowledge. Pragmatism emerged in the late 19th century thanks to American thinkers like Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, and John Dewey. They didn't see truth as something fixed and eternal. Instead, truth was fluid, something that could change and evolve based on how well it performs in real-life situations. Think of a belief as a tool. Take, for example, the idea that germs cause disease. That idea isn't accepted because it sounds beautiful or fits into some grand theory, but because it leads to effective treatments, vaccines, and healthier lives. In pragmatism, a belief is true because it works. Pragmatism extends beyond science into moral and social questions too. Rather than arguing endlessly about the perfect definition of justice, a pragmatist would focus on which laws or actions actually promote a fairer and more stable society. The emphasis stays on practical results rather than idealized concepts. One of pragmatism's greatest strengths is its adaptability. It doesn't demand that ideas be flawless, only that they be useful enough to make a real difference. And if they stop working, pragmatism is perfectly fine with abandoning them. By measuring truth through outcomes, pragmatism blends philosophy with everyday practical thinking. It treats ideas less like sacred, unchanging answers and more like strategies, tools we test, adjust, and continue using only as long as they help us find our way in the world. Empiricism, knowledge through experience. You know sugar is sweet because you have tasted it. Your knowledge comes from direct experience, not from ideas you were born with. This is the heart of empiricism, the philosophical view that all knowledge originates from sensory experience. According to empiricism, we enter the world as blank slates, and everything we come to understand is built from what we see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. This idea directly opposes rationalism, which suggests some knowledge is innate or built into the mind. Empiricists argue that without experience, even the simplest concepts would not exist. For example, you can't truly know what cold feels like unless you've experienced it, and the color blue only has meaning once you've seen it. The roots of empiricism trace back to philosophers like John Locke, who famously described the mind at birth as a blank sheet of paper. For Locke, experience is the pen that writes on that paper through observation and reflection. Later thinkers such as George Berkeley and David Hume expanded on this, demonstrating how everything from complex ideas to our sense of morality can be traced back to what we've experienced. Empiricism also forms the foundation of the modern scientific method. Instead of relying solely on logic or intuition, science observes, measures, and tests. Knowledge is built by collecting data and repeating experiments. This approach reflects empiricism's core belief that truth begins with what we can see and verify. But empiricism isn't limited to science alone. It shapes how we think about learning, memory, perception, and how much we trust information. By anchoring knowledge firmly in experience, empiricism offers a clear framework for understanding the world, one sense at a time. Coherentism, beliefs supporting each other. We often think beliefs need solid evidence. But what if there's no single ultimate foundation? What if instead, our beliefs support one another in a network? That's the core idea behind coherentism. Coherentism is a theory within epistemology, the study of knowledge, that proposes beliefs are justified not because they rest on one basic, unquestionable truth, but because they fit together in a consistent, logical whole. In other words, a belief is reasonable if it aligns well within the broader system of your other beliefs. Imagine it like a puzzle. One piece alone can't prove the entire picture is correct. But when all the pieces connect smoothly and reveal a clear image, you feel confident in what you see. Coherentism sees knowledge in the same way. Individual beliefs gain credibility through how well they integrate with the rest of your belief system. This approach contrasts with foundationalism, which claims knowledge should be based on certain self-evident truths or direct experiences that serve as a firm ground. Coherentists argue that no belief exists in isolation. Even what we assume as obvious, like what we perceive or remember, is understood through the lens of our existing beliefs. Here's a simple example. You believe your friend is home because their lights are on, their car is parked outside, and they told you they'd be there earlier. Each of these facts supports your belief, but none alone conclusively proves it. The belief grows stronger because all these details fit together logically. Coherentism doesn't promise absolute certainty, but that's not its goal. Instead, it aims to build a well-connected web of beliefs that support and reinforce one another. The more internally consistent and tightly linked your beliefs are, the more justified they become, at least within that interconnected system. Phenomenalism, existence through experience. If you leave a room, the objects inside don't vanish. They're still there, right? Phenomenalism challenges whether that's the right way to think about existence. According to this view, things don't exist independently of experience. Instead, they exist as potential experiences, possibilities of perception. Phenomenalism is a philosophical stance that links the existence of physical objects directly to sensory experience. Saying something exists essentially means that it could be perceived under the right conditions. If no one is currently experiencing it, its existence depends on how it would appear if someone were to observe it. Take the example of a book resting on a shelf. Even if the room is empty, phenomenalism holds that the book still exists because if a person walked in, they would be able to see it, touch it, or even hear it fall. The reality of the book is defined by the experiences it could produce, not by some separate or hidden substance behind those experiences. This way of thinking became influential during the 19th and 20th centuries, especially among philosophers who wanted to better understand how we talk about things we aren't directly sensing at the moment. Phenomenalism avoids claiming that objects have some mysterious existence out there. Instead, it treats statements about objects as shorthand for describing patterns of possible experiences. One key advantage of phenomenalism is how it sidesteps certain challenges posed by skepticism. Because it doesn't depend on a world beyond experience. It doesn't have to prove that such a world exists. Everything meaningful is grounded in what can be observed, or at least, what could be observed. In this way, phenomenalism transforms our view of reality. It doesn't deny the existence of the world, but shifts attention from invisible matter to observable experiences, turning physical objects into collections of sensory possibilities rather than independent things. Foundationalism, building knowledge on a solid base. When you build anything, you start with a foundation. Without it, everything above is at risk of collapsing. Foundationalism applies this same principle to knowledge. Foundationalism is an epistemological theory asserting that all our beliefs rest upon a core set of basic, self-justified beliefs. These foundational beliefs are independent. They don't depend on other beliefs to be valid. Instead, they serve as secure starting points. From these, more complex and layered beliefs are constructed, much like building a pyramid. At the very base of this pyramid lie beliefs considered clear and undeniable, such as I exist or I feel pain. These are truths that require no further proof to be accepted. On top of these foundational beliefs, we build broader beliefs about the world, about science, history, and everything else. This idea gained prominence during the rise of modern philosophy, especially with thinkers like René Descartes. Descartes famously doubted everything he could, searching for a belief so certain it could not be questioned. He concluded that the act of thinking itself was undeniable, encapsulated in the idea, I think, therefore I am, which he regarded as a solid foundation to build knowledge upon. In foundationalism, justification flows upward. Higher level beliefs, like water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, are supported by more basic ones, such as sensory experiences and logical reasoning. The aim is to avoid circular reasoning, where beliefs only support one another without a secure base. Critics, however, point out that identifying truly foundational beliefs is more difficult than it sounds. What seems obvious to one person might not be so to another. Yet, despite these challenges, foundationalism has significantly influenced how we understand knowledge and the quest for certainty. At its heart, foundationalism is an effort to anchor human understanding in something firm, starting with beliefs that can stand independently and using them as the groundwork for all other knowledge we claim. Constructivism, how we build knowledge together, knowing what a country is, what money represents, or how traffic lights function. These aren't natural facts waiting to be uncovered. They are human creations. This is the core principle behind constructivism. Constructivism is a philosophical perspective that sees knowledge and meaning not as something simply found or discovered, but as actively constructed. Rather than passively absorbing information from the world, we shape what we know through our personal experiences, social interactions, and cultural context. At its essence, constructivism explores how people develop frameworks to interpret reality. Take the concept of time, for instance. It is not universally experienced in the same way. Some cultures perceive time as a straight line, progressing from past to future. Others view it as cyclical, repeating in patterns. The ways we measure, talk about, and even feel time are shaped by the cultural and social systems we inhabit, not something hardwired into our brains. In education, constructivism has revolutionized how we view learning. Instead of treating students as empty vessels to be filled with facts, this approach sees them as active participants who construct understanding through exploration and context. Learning is more than memorizing isolated facts. It's about connecting new knowledge to what someone already understands. When it comes to science and ethics, constructivism emphasizes that what we accept as truth or moral values is often influenced by our history, language, and collective beliefs. Even scientific models are not perfect reflections of reality, but tools created by humans to make sense of the world. Constructivism doesn't imply that anything goes. Evidence and logic remain essential, but it reminds us that all human understanding is filtered through the lens of our thinking, communication, and way of life. By highlighting the mind's role in constructing meaning, constructivism shifts the philosophical focus from simply asking what the world is to understanding how we come to know it in the first place. Logic, the science of sound reasoning. If all mammals include cats, and your pet happens to be a cat, then logically your pet must be a mammal. This is logic in its simplest, clearest form, easy to understand and tough to dispute. Logic is the branch of philosophy dedicated to studying the principles of valid reasoning. It helps us distinguish which arguments hold up and which collapse under scrutiny. Rather than focusing on the content of our beliefs, logic examines the process of our thinking, asking whether the conclusions we reach truly follow from the premises we start with. At its foundation, logic deals with statements and how they relate to one another. If one statement is true, what else necessarily has to be true because of it? This framework gives logical reasoning its strength. It allows us to create chains of thought that are transparent, reliable, and testable. There are various types of logic, but the two most prominent are deductive and inductive reasoning. Deductive logic moves from general rules to specific instances. For example, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore, Socrates is mortal. When the premises are accurate, the conclusion must be true. Inductive logic, on the other hand, works from specific observations to broader generalizations. For instance, observing the sun rise every morning and inferring that it will likely rise again tomorrow. While inductive reasoning doesn't guarantee certainty like deduction, it's invaluable for everyday decisions and scientific inquiry. Modern logic has also embraced symbolic systems, where arguments are expressed through symbols and formulas similar to mathematics. These tools simplify complex reasoning and are especially helpful when dealing with abstract concepts. Logic itself doesn't declare what is true, rather, it clarifies what conclusions legitimately follow from given statements. It forms the backbone of rational thought and stands as one of philosophy's most rigorous instruments for distinguishing sound reasoning from flawed arguments. Dialectics, turning disagreement into understanding. When two people clash strongly over opposing views, it's natural to think that only one of them can be right. But in philosophy, such disagreements aren't dead ends. They can actually spark progress. This is where dialectics comes into play. Dialectics is a way of thinking and reasoning that focuses on resolving contradictions rather than ignoring or avoiding them. Instead of seeing opposing ideas as obstacles, dialectics treats them as the driving force behind growth, learning, and change. Typically, dialectical reasoning follows a three-step pattern. First, there's an initial idea or claim called the thesis. Then, an opposing viewpoint arises, the antithesis, which challenges the thesis. Through the dynamic tension and dialogue between these conflicting positions, a new and more refined idea emerges, the synthesis. This synthesis blends aspects of both earlier views and pushes the discussion forward. This method traces back to ancient Greece, especially in the work of Socrates, who used questioning and dialogue to challenge assumptions and guide people toward clearer, deeper insights. Later, philosophers like Hegel formalized dialectics, describing it as a process where ideas evolve through struggle and resolution. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels extended dialectics beyond ideas to real-world history, politics, and economics. They argued that societal change happens through class conflict, a clash between opposing social groups, leading to new political and economic arrangements. This perspective became known as dialectical materialism. Dialectics isn't just about big philosophical theories. It's also at work in everyday life. Imagine two teammates disagreeing on how to solve a problem. Through debate, reconsideration, and collaboration, they arrive at a better solution than either could have found alone. That's dialectical thinking in practice. At its heart, dialectics is a powerful tool for grasping how ideas grow and transform through opposition. It sees conflict not as something to fear or avoid, but as a vital process that brings us closer to fuller, clearer understandings of the world. Linguistic turn. When words became the key to meaning, ever had an argument where it turned out the real issue wasn't the idea, but how you and the other person were using words differently? That insight sits at the heart of one of the most important shifts in modern philosophy, the linguistic turn. The linguistic turn was a major movement in 20th century philosophy that placed language, not just thought or experience, at the center of philosophical inquiry. Philosophers began to ask, how do the words we use shape the way we think? How does language frame our understanding of reality, truth, and meaning? Before this shift, philosophy was largely concerned with direct questions like what is real, what is good, what is the nature of being? But linguistic philosophers argued that before we can answer those big questions, we need to ask a more basic one. What do we mean by the words we're using? Misunderstandings, they claimed, often aren't rooted in bad reasoning, but in vague, ambiguous, or misleading language. Thinkers like Ludwig Wittgenstein were central to this shift. He believed that many philosophical problems arise not because the world is confusing, but because language is messy. If we could understand how language works, how words refer to things, how context affects meaning, how rules govern usage, we might untangle or even dissolve some of the deepest puzzles in philosophy. The linguistic turn didn't just change philosophy, it rippled outward into fields like linguistics, psychology, computer science, and literary theory. It offered a new set of tools for analyzing how we think, communicate, and interpret reality. At its core, the linguistic turn proposes something radical. Words are not just labels for thoughts. They are the framework that shapes thought itself. If you want to understand ideas clearly, you must first understand the language in which those ideas are formed. In short, it's not just what we think that matters. It's how we speak, define, and describe. To do philosophy well, the linguistic turn insists you have to get the language right first. Existentialism, the freedom and burden of meaning. Existentialism is a powerful philosophical movement centered on human freedom, individuality, and the deep challenge of creating meaning in a world that offers none by default. It rose to prominence in the 20th century through the work of thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and Albert Camus. At the heart of existentialism lies a radical idea. Existence precedes essence. That means we aren't born with a predefined purpose or essence. We simply exist first, and only later define who we are through our choices and actions. Unlike a tool, like a knife designed for cutting, humans aren't created with a set function. We must create our own path, step by step. This freedom is empowering, but also terrifying, because if no one else can tell you who you are or what your life means, you bear the full responsibility of shaping your existence. That weight often brings with it doubt, anxiety, and what existentialists call angst. The feeling of confronting a vast, silent universe and realizing that you're the one in charge. But existentialism isn't about despair. It's about honesty. It acknowledges that the universe may not hand you answers or purpose, but rather than collapse under that emptiness. Existentialism urges you to stand up and create your own meaning anyway. This idea is captured powerfully in Albert Camus's image of Sisyphus, a man cursed to roll a boulder uphill forever, only to have it roll back down. Camus argues that even in the face of such absurdity, we can imagine Sisyphus as happy because he chooses to persist, to keep going. and in doing so defines his own defiance and purpose. Existentialism doesn't pretend life is easy, certain, or neatly structured, but it offers something deeper, a call to live authentically, to make your own values, to embrace the uncertainty, and find meaning not out there, but in how you live, choose, and act. Because in the existentialist view, that's what makes life truly your own. Nihilism, when nothing comes preloaded with meaning, that unsettling feeling that maybe nothing truly matters, is where nihilism begins. Nihilism is the philosophical belief that life lacks inherent meaning, value, or purpose. It challenges the idea that there's a cosmic order, divine plan, or moral truth waiting to be discovered. Instead, it suggests that much of what we take for granted, moral systems, social norms, even the concept of truth itself, are human inventions, not eternal facts. At its core, nihilism strips away the comforting illusion that the universe comes with built-in significance. It asks, what if everything we believe is just scaffolding we've built to avoid confronting the void? This perspective isn't just a bleak mood or teenage angst. It's a serious and complex philosophical stance explored by thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche, often misunderstood, and others across existential and postmodern thought. Importantly, nihilism doesn't necessarily lead to despair. Instead, it offers a confrontation, a raw honesty about the fragile foundations of belief. It's the realization that our deepest convictions may not rest on anything solid. And what happens when that realization hits? There are several branches of nihilism. Existential nihilism asks whether human life has any ultimate meaning. Moral nihilism questions whether there are any real, universal moral truths. Epistemological nihilism goes further, challenging the very possibility of knowing anything with certainty. Experiencing nihilism can feel like hitting a wall. If all traditional values collapse under scrutiny, what's left? For some, this leads to apathy, cynicism, or even nihilistic despair. But for others, it becomes a turning point. If nothing is inherently meaningful, then we are free to create meaning ourselves. Nihilism became especially prominent in the modern era as religious certainty declined and scientific understanding replaced old metaphysical worldviews. In tearing down inherited narratives, it didn't just leave a void, it left a challenge. How do you live in a world without guarantees? Nihilism offers no comfort, no tidy answers, but it does offer radical honesty. It asks us to look beyond the stories we've inherited and examine what, if anything, truly remains. It's not about erasing hope, but about rebuilding meaning from the ground up, using nothing but your own freedom and courage. Absurdism, searching for meaning in a silent universe. You wake up, go to work, pay bills, make plans, doing your best to live a life that feels meaningful. But here's the catch. The universe never promises that any of it truly means anything. That disconnect between our deep craving for meaning and the silence of the world around us is the heart of absurdism. Absurdism is the philosophical idea that centers on a fundamental clash. We are beings who desperately want meaning, but we live in a universe that doesn't guarantee it. It doesn't say life is meaningless. It says that we search for meaning, and the universe doesn't respond. This tension between expectation and reality is what the French philosopher Albert Camus called the absurd. But to Camus, the absurd wasn't a tragedy. It was a truth, and how we respond to it is what really matters. You can't fix the absurd. You can't escape it, but you can face it. Chemists illustrated this with the myth of Sisyphus, a man condemned by the gods to roll a giant boulder uphill forever, only for it to tumble back down each time. On the surface, it looks like a punishment, a pointless cycle, but chemists flip the story. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, he wrote, because even though the task is endless, Sisyphus still chooses to push the rock. He acknowledges the absurd, yet keeps going. That's the spirit of absurdism. It's not about despair, and it's not about pretending everything's fine. It's about rejecting false answers, the easy explanations, the made-up meanings that don't really hold. Instead, absurdism calls us to face the chaos honestly, without illusions. It's a philosophy of defiance, not surrender. It says, yes, the universe might be indifferent, but that doesn't mean I have to be. Absurdism gives us a way to live without guarantees. No perfect truths, no ultimate answers, just the courage to keep moving forward, to keep creating, loving, building, and choosing, even in the face of the absurd. Because in the end, it's not about what the world gives you. It's about what you bring to it. Authenticity, the courage to be yourself. Being true to yourself sounds simple until you try it. In a world flooded with expectations, standards, and appearances, authenticity becomes a radical act. In philosophy, authenticity means living in alignment with your own values, not just doing what's expected, but making choices that are genuinely yours. It's not about rejecting society, but about not letting society live your life for you. This idea became central to existentialist thought, especially in the 20th century through philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. They believed that in a universe with no preset meaning, each of us carries the burden and the privilege of creating our own. That means we're free, but it also means we're responsible. And authenticity is how we rise to that responsibility. To live authentically is to consciously choose, not out of fear, not for approval, but because it's what you truly believe. Taking a job just because it sounds impressive to others? That might be inauthentic. But choosing a path that aligns with your values, even if it's less glamorous or less understood, that's a step toward an authentic life. Authenticity also has a lot to do with identity. It means embracing who you are, flaws, contradictions, uncertainties, and all. Not wearing masks to fit in, not playing roles to avoid judgment, but showing up as you, even when it's hard. It takes self-awareness to recognize what really matters to you. It takes courage to act on that truth, and it takes responsibility to own the consequences of living that way. Authenticity isn't about perfection. It's about consistency between your inner world and your outer life. It says, I might not fit your mold, but this is who I am, and I'm not going to live someone else's life. In a culture obsessed with image, authenticity is quiet rebellion. It's not just a personal goal. It's a philosophical commitment to live a life that is genuinely your own. Alienation, the distance between you and your world. You wake up, go to work, check the boxes, meet the deadlines. You're doing everything right, and yet something feels off, as if you're living at arm's length from your own life. That uneasy feeling has a name: alienation. In philosophy, alienation is more than loneliness. It's the disconnect between you and your work, your community, even your own sense of self. You're not just alone. You're out of sync with a world that doesn't seem to reflect who you are or what you care about. The concept took center stage in the work of Karl Marx, who used it to analyze life in industrial society. He observed that many workers don't own what they produce, don't control how they work, and rarely see the results of their labor. Imagine spending your life assembling parts of a machine you'll never use, for a company you don't control, in a system that doesn't see you, only your output. Marx broke alienation into four kinds. Alienation from the product, you don't connect with what you create. Alienation from the process, you have no control over how you work. Alienation from others, your labor pits you against other workers. Alienation from yourself, you lose touch with your potential, your purpose. But the idea didn't stay confined to factories. Existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir expanded it beyond economics. They explored how social roles, institutions, and cultural expectations can also alienate us. When you live by someone else's script, saying what you're supposed to say, doing what's expected, that's a quieter, deeper kind of alienation. You're present, but not connected. Busy, but not fulfilled. Philosophical alienation isn't just a feeling, it's a signal, a sign that modern life might be misaligned with basic human needs: creativity, autonomy, connection, and meaning. It asks hard questions. What does it mean to be truly yourself in a system that treats you as replaceable? Can you feel whole in a world that feels fragmented? Alienation doesn't just describe disconnection. It demands reconnection, freedom, and determinism. Do you really choose? You choose what to eat, what to wear, what to say. It feels like you're in control. But what if every choice you've ever made was already shaped by genetics, upbringing, brain chemistry, the laws of physics? That's the heart of the age-old debate between freedom and determinism. Determinism is the idea that everything in the universe follows cause and effect. In theory, if someone knew every variable, your biology, past experiences, external conditions, they could predict exactly what you'll choose. From this view, free will is an illusion. You don't decide, you unfold, like clockwork. On the other side, defenders of free will argue that human beings can still choose between alternatives, even when influenced by past events. You're not just a product of your past. You're an agent who can interrupt the pattern. But many thinkers look for a middle path. It's called compatibilism. This view says that determinism and free will don't have to cancel each other out. As long as your choices come from you, your own thoughts, desires, and reasoning, you can still be free, even if those desires have causes. What matters isn't that you're free from influences, but that you're free from coercion. This isn't just abstract theorizing, it shapes real-world questions. Can we hold people morally responsible if their choices are determined? Should justice systems punish behavior that was inevitable? Is personal growth possible if our paths are already written? The tension between freedom and determinism isn't just about philosophy. It's about how we define ourselves. Are we creators of our actions or passengers in a predetermined ride? And ultimately, what does it really mean to choose? Deduction, following logic to sure conclusions. The type of reasoning where you conclude that Socrates must be mortal because he is human, and all humans are mortal, is called deduction. It's one of the most reliable tools we have to determine what logically follows from given information. Deduction is a form of logical thinking that begins with broad, general principles and applies them to specific situations. When the starting premises are true and the reasoning is sound, the conclusion must also be true. This isn't just a guess or an estimate. It's a certainty, assuming everything is correctly in place. Philosophers and scientists have relied on deduction for thousands of years to clarify arguments, remove contradictions, and build solid conclusions based on firm foundations. You can think of it like a chain reaction. Once the first links are secure, everything else falls into place naturally. Deductive reasoning is especially powerful in formal fields such as mathematics. For example, if you know that every square is a rectangle, and you're given a particular shape that is a square, then you can confidently say that shape is also a rectangle. Here, you're not verifying this in the physical world, but working through definitions and logical rules. However, deduction has its limits. It depends entirely on the truth of its initial assumptions. If the premises are false, the conclusion might be logically correct, but disconnected from reality. For example, if someone says, all fish can fly, goldfish are fish, therefore goldfish can fly, the logical structure is valid, but the first premise is false. That's why deduction often works hand in hand with observation-based reasoning like induction. Deduction provides the logical framework, while induction supplies the empirical input. Together, they offer a more complete way to reason, argue, and understand the world. Deduction gives us a powerful method to think clearly and precisely. It takes what we know and traces a direct path to where those truths logically lead. No shortcuts, just straightforward reasoning. Induction. Learning from patterns to predict the future. Induction is the process of reasoning where we look at specific examples and use them to form broader conclusions. It doesn't provide absolute certainty, but it allows us to make informed guesses about what is likely to happen next. This kind of thinking is fundamental not only in everyday decision-making, but also in science and the way we build knowledge based on experience. The basic idea behind induction is simple. You observe a repeated pattern and then draw a general conclusion from it. For instance, if you notice that every time you water a plant, it grows, you might conclude that watering helps plants grow. You don't have to water every single plant on Earth to accept this pattern. Inductive reasoning is especially important in scientific work. Scientists conduct experiments, gather data, and then develop general laws or theories to explain how the natural world operates. However, induction is not foolproof. Just because a pattern has held true in the past doesn't guarantee it will continue forever. This is the famous problem of induction, highlighted by philosopher David Hume. He pointed out that there is no logical certainty that the future will always follow the patterns of the past. Still, despite its limitations, induction remains incredibly practical. We use it daily to make choices, form expectations, and learn from what we experience. Weather predictions, medical studies, and even our daily habits all depend on inductive reasoning. While induction doesn't promise absolute truth, it provides a way to move from what we observe to what we understand. It's the method that helps us turn past experience into a useful prediction, an educated guess about what might happen next. Abduction. Finding the most likely explanation. Imagine you walk into your kitchen and notice water on the floor. You didn't see it spill, but you spot the dog's bowl knocked over. You immediately guess that the dog probably caused the mess. This kind of reasoning is called abduction. Abduction, also known as inference to the best explanation, is a way of thinking where you begin with an observation and then try to identify the most plausible cause behind it. Unlike deduction, which guarantees a conclusion if the starting facts are true, or induction, which finds patterns from repeated events. Abduction is about selecting the explanation that best fits the evidence, even if it's not absolutely certain. We use abduction constantly in daily life. If your phone isn't charging, you might suspect the cable is broken. You haven't tested every possibility, but based on past experience, that seems like the most reasonable guess. Doctors rely on abduction when diagnosing patients' symptoms. Detectives use it to piece together clues at crime scenes. It's the mental tool that helps us move from confusing facts to a clear, sensible story. The concept of abduction was introduced by American philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce. He saw it as a crucial part of how we generate new ideas. It often serves as the starting point for solving problems, turning scattered clues into a working theory. Of course, abduction isn't flawless. The explanation that seems best might not always be correct. But when time, information, or certainty is limited, abduction provides a practical way to make sense of the unknown by filling in the blanks with what's most likely. Abduction is the driving force behind moments when we ask, what's really going on here? And come up with a smart, informed guess. It's the reasoning behind breakthroughs, discoveries, and those everyday aha moments when everything suddenly clicks. Fallibilism. Always open to being wrong. Everyone makes mistakes. But what if that idea didn't just apply to people, but to knowledge itself? That's the heart of fallibilism. Fallibilism is the philosophical position that no belief, theory, or system of knowledge is ever completely free from the possibility of error. It doesn't claim that everything is false, just that even our most trusted ideas might turn out to be wrong. It's a reminder that certainty is always provisional and subject to change if better evidence or reasoning comes along. This idea has deep roots in modern philosophy and science. Thinkers like Charles Sanders Peirce and Karl Popper emphasized that knowledge should be flexible, not fixed. In science, even the most reliable theories, like evolution or gravity, aren't treated as unchangeable truths. They're seen as the best explanations we have for now, open to revision if future discoveries demand it. Fallibilism pushes back against the idea of absolute certainty. Consider something simple, like using a GPS. You trust it to guide you, but occasionally, it leads you down the wrong road. That's a small example of fallibilism in action, relying on knowledge while remaining aware it might be flawed. But fallibilism doesn't mean we should doubt everything or live in constant uncertainty. It's not about skepticism for the sake of it. It's about intellectual humility, the willingness to say, I could be wrong, and staying open to new ideas and better explanations. In philosophy, fallibilism challenges rigid belief systems that claim to offer final answers. Instead, it supports a vision of knowledge as an ongoing process, one of refinement, correction, and growth. It's not a sign of weakness to admit we might be wrong. In fact, fallibilism is a strength. It's a way to keep learning in a world where the truth is often more complex than it first appears. Paradox. When logic turns on itself, everyone in town who doesn't shave themselves is shaved by the barber. But who shaves the barber? That's a classic paradox. A situation where logical reasoning seems to collapse, even though every step appears to make sense. In philosophy, a paradox is a statement or scenario that leads to a contradiction or a conclusion that defies common sense. It happens when ideas that seem perfectly reasonable clash in a way that makes it difficult, or even impossible, to say what's actually true. Paradoxes come in many forms. Some are logical, like the liar paradox. This statement is false. If it's true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. It's a loop that defies resolution. Others are more practical, like Zeno's paradoxes, which argue that motion is impossible. To walk across a room, you'd first have to reach the halfway point, then halfway again, and again, an infinite number of steps. So how do we ever move at all? What makes paradoxes so fascinating is that they don't just confuse us, they teach us. A good paradox doesn't just reveal a mistaken reasoning. It exposes the limits of our concepts, language, or assumptions. It challenges us to think deeper about things we usually take for granted. Philosophers use paradoxes like tools. They test the strength of arguments, uncover hidden flaws, and force us to refine how we think. In math and science, paradoxes have even triggered revolutions in understanding. Russell's paradox, for example, revealed deep problems in early set theory and helped lay the foundation for modern logic. Paradoxes aren't always meant to be solved. Often, they remain open questions, mental puzzles that stretch our minds and sharpen our reasoning. They remind us that reality is more complex than it seems, and that the search for truth is as much about the questions we ask as the answers we find. Falsifiability, the line between science and belief. Imagine someone claims that invisible aliens are watching you at all times, but they leave no trace and can't be detected in any way. How would you prove them wrong? You can't. And that's exactly why falsifiability matters. Falsifiability is the idea that for a claim to be scientific or meaningfully testable, there must be some possible scenario, at least in theory, that could prove it false. It doesn't mean the claim is false. It just means it must be disprovable to count as something we can truly test and evaluate. The concept was championed by philosopher Karl Popper, who argued that falsifiability is what separates science from pseudoscience. Take the claim, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level. That's falsifiable. You can run an experiment and check it. But a claim like everything happens for a reason isn't falsifiable. No matter what happens, you can always interpret it as part of some mysterious plan. There's no test that could prove it wrong. This distinction is powerful. A falsifiable theory is one that invites challenge, evidence, and refinement that makes it stronger over time. In contrast, a theory that can never be wrong can never truly be confirmed. It floats above reality, untouchable, but also unverifiable. In everyday life, the idea is just as useful. If someone insists they're always right but never allow for the possibility of being wrong, they're avoiding falsifiability. They're not engaging in rational thought. They're defending a belief that can't be questioned. Falsifiability sets a boundary between claims we can test and beliefs we can't challenge. Both may be interesting, but only the falsifiable ones form the foundation of knowledge, the kind we can build on, correct, and improve with evidence. Analytic philosophy, thinking clearly about big questions. Philosophy often tackles life's biggest mysteries: existence, knowledge, ethics, meaning. But analytic philosophy takes a different path. Instead of embracing mystery, it tries to clarify it, step by step, using logic, precise language, and structured arguments. Analytic philosophy is a modern approach that emphasizes clarity, rigor, and logical structure over abstract speculation or poetic insight. Rather than building sweeping metaphysical systems, analytic philosophers focus on what we're really saying, what it means, and whether the reasoning holds up. This tradition took shape in the early 20th century with thinkers like Bertrand Russell, G.E. Moore, and later Ludwig Wittgenstein. They believed that many philosophical problems were not actually deep mysteries, but linguistic confusions. If we could express ideas more precisely, some of those unsolvable puzzles might just vanish. A core method of analytic philosophy is breaking concepts down. For instance, if someone says, all bachelors are unmarried, an analytic philosopher would note that this is an analytic statement, true by definition, requiring no empirical evidence. This kind of analysis helps distinguish between simple truths, hidden assumptions, and complex questions that need deeper exploration. Analytic philosophy spans many topics: ethics, politics, knowledge, science, but all are approached with the same mindset. Define the terms, clarify the question, test the logic, follow the argument wherever it leads. While it may seem technical, this method has profoundly shaped everything from modern logic and language theory to AI debates and legal reasoning. It's not about eliminating the big questions. It's about making sure we understand them before we try to answer them. Analytic philosophy doesn't promise ultimate truths, but it demands that any answers we offer must be clear, logical, and built on solid reasoning. In a world full of noise, that kind of clarity is more powerful than it seems.